Perfect. Okay, content. Okay, Arna. So in your content section under lecture information,
Yeah.
I like to put everything in here under lecture slides. So this is how far we've come up until last week. So there are your lecture slides and then your recording as well, which is also in YouTube. So if you follow, you can follow the channel maybe, and then as soon as I upload, you'll get a notification. I do apologize though. I had 4 batches of marking to do this last week. So it's been a bit crazy. So I do apologize for not being as responsive as I should be. If you're waiting for an email from me as well, please, no, I will get to you as soon as I possibly can. I've just been a bit far behind a little bit. And then I had a conference this weekend as well, which was very exciting. But it has been
Thank you.
a lot of fun. Okay, Arna, thank you so much. I did see your email. I just needed to go in and find the links as well. So this
No
is much
problem.
easier.
Thank you.
Okay, right now, let me share our whiteboard. Okay, all right, guys. So in graphs, what do you think is going to happen to the petrol price in South Africa? Okay, think long term. Okay, because remember, when we are doing simultaneous changes in demand and supply, it's going to be, there are going to be changes in both of those elements. Okay, so just to give you an idea, so obviously you guys know that we are starting out with our demand and supply. Okay. Oh, also, your graphs were fantastic. Very well done. That was definitely not where you guys were losing marks. It was literally just elaborate more. Okay. It's always better to give a little bit more information, except, of course, where there are restrictions on the word count. And you do, of course, want to uh, give a concise summary or a concise argument, but it is very useful to, if you can, just add a little bit of content or at least make sure that if something is worth 10 marks, that there are 10 facts there. Okay. Just shows that you have an understanding and can demonstrate how you interpret what is happening in the market and what is being asked of you in your questions. Okay, so here is your basic demand and supply graph. Okay. Now, what do you guys think is going to happen to the petrol price? Okay, so at the moment, we're sitting in this scenario here, okay, where this is our equilibrium. Okay, so in the short term, any ideas? Have you heard anything in the news, anything that either concerns you or makes you think that either demand is going to suffer or supply is going to go up or be further restricted? What do you think is going to happen?
Supply will definitely suffer due to shortages and oil prices going up. So I think supply will suffer, but demand will increase.
That is a very interesting perspective. Okay, so Arna, okay, so can you guys try and draw those graphs? Okay, pick a spot anywhere. I'll make this. You can pick a spot anywhere on our very large whiteboard and you can just draw yourself a quick graph. Okay, it's just useful to process real world events in a theoretical format. Okay, so that when you encounter these things later on, you actually you know, how to think about it. I think you're absolutely right, Anna. Okay, so if we're looking at this type of graph, What are we saying the first thing is going to happen? Okay, so in the short term, we are predicting a restriction in supply. Do we agree? Does anybody disagree? Anybody think anything else is going to happen? Do you think it's maybe possible?
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Yes, fine.
Hi, hi, ma'am.
Hi, Nandi.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask what's the question again? So the question is if, hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, so the question is, what do you think is going to
Hello.
happen? Oh, goodness. Nandi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so the question is, what do you think is going to happen to the petrol price in South Africa? Let's say this year. Okay, so I'm going to make this big so that we can all see it very clearly. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen to the petrol price? Let me make this even clearer. In South Africa by Q3. Okay. So what have we heard so far? What are the factors that are participating here? Okay, so Arno mentioned that we're going to have restrictions in supply. Okay, obviously this is due to the strait being blocked off of Hormuz. Anybody else hear about anything else that's potentially happening in South Africa?
Won't the prices of petrol increase?
Very good. Okay, so restrictions in supply will naturally, nice, Lily, very nice, guys. Okay, so like you said, I'm just going to zoom in here again. Okay, so the price of petrol, as a result of this restriction, the petrol price will now decrease. Oh, sorry, increase. Okay. Okay, so that would naturally cause a quantity demanded drop, right? Or would it? What do you guys think happens after this supply restriction? Because if we're looking at what's going to happen by Q3, so we know that in right now in Q1 of this, the first quarter of the year, that we have now had this, the Strait of Hormuz is now blocked or very restricted supplies coming through. So we know the petrol price is going up. Okay. What else is going to happen? Let's get crazy. Like, throw out some crazy ideas. Do you think that people are going to start buying less petrol if the price goes up?
Um, won't demand stay the same because petrol is what everyone needs petrol, I guess. I don't know.
Brilliant. Yes, exactly. Okay, so the tricky thing is demand can't go anywhere. It's not like we can say, okay, we're no longer going to use our cars. Although you are right. Hold on. I think, who was it? Keegan. Yes, you are right. Now, alternatives resources in this case. So now, depending on the time frame that you're looking at, typically you're looking at about a year. Now, if this is a sustained increase in petrol price. People might, nicely done, Keegan, exactly that. People might not be willing to switch to a new type of car. Like they might not now start buying electric vehicles or diesel engines, but Uber is now a very reasonable alternative. It could be lower in costs. You don't have to use your car. So we could have this actually work this way. If people start to also maybe, what else could we do? We could maybe carpool. I'm going to actually put that in. Uber alternative. Do the trains still run? Maybe buses? Taxis? This is very interesting. Okay, so we have a couple of scenarios here. Either we agree to pay this higher price point and we don't really drop our quantity demanded by much. Okay, so if our demand does not adjust, this is what we are going to end up with. Okay, a market that is out of equilibrium, that gives us what we demand, but at a price far higher. Also, we will still have this issue that not everybody will be able to get it. Have you guys heard anything, not to spread any conspiracies, but have you guys heard anything about a few of the depots running out of fuel? There have been rumors on social media, okay, indicating that already we're having, we're running out. Okay. Now it's probably just restrictions in the supply. There's also a good chance that the strait will open up again. Okay. They look like they are moving towards that point. Okay. If that is to happen, then our supply restriction could be quite short-lived. Okay. Because this is not an ideal scenario. Because inevitably, what happens is we will pay the price. Demand will not stay there. We will be forced to still get to work. So, in the short term, we could see a supply restriction that will cause a petrol price increase, which will mean that with production, Keegan, I love how you're on a roll tonight. Yes. Okay, we're going to look at that next. So we have a petrol price increase. So in the short term, we'll probably use alternatives. Trains, taxis, Ubers. Okay. But if you've got a car at home, you're still paying a premium. You're still paying for insurance. Even if your car is sitting there as a very high-priced lawn ornament, it is still costing you money. So inevitably, despite the ridiculously high price, you will eventually be forced into buying the petrol that you need at the original quantity, but the raised price. Okay, so next question. Let us move. Okay. Here we go. Here's an open space. Okay, so next question. What happens to the food prices in South Africa?
I think the price will increase as well due to transporting food from where it is to where it needs to be.
Absolutely, Arna. Okay, so like you guys are saying, the problem is every time, so the in supply chain, you by the time you guys get, if you go that route, okay, in supply chain, we teach you that up to 60% of the price that a consumer pays is transport and packaging costs. So the supply chain makes up a huge amount of your consumer prices, your market price. Okay, so for example, I'm sure you guys, I don't know if you buy water. Okay, so if you go to the store and you buy a 5 liter bottle of like Titsukama water, it'll probably cost you about anywhere between 15 and 23 Rand in a retail store. But if you were to keep your 5 liter bottle and go and have it filled up, how much would it cost? Maybe a Rand a liter? Okay, why? Thank you, Leslie. Absolutely. It'll cost you only 5 Rand because the majority of the price of that bottle of water is the actual plastic, the actual packaging, and then getting the water to where you need it. So if you take care of that part, you can actually adjust quite a lot. So what you're saying is very, very likely to happen. So we have increased petrol prices, which then results in increased transport costs. Forgive me, I can't seem to spell. Okay, transport costs, okay, which would inevitably lead to increased food costs. What do you think that looks like on the graph? Okay, so let's look at so this actual product that we're going to be looking at in our demand and supply is food, okay? So now we know quantity is here. I'm just going to say Q because it's quite large. And price is here. What do you guys think this scenario looks like? Okay, you'll see down here at the bottom, you've got all of these little icons. Okay, so if you want to just use a pen, you can just click on that and you can choose a color and you can sort of draw your own thing. If you want to just drop a note, you can. And of course, here's where you add text. So if we were to look at the food prices in South Africa, what does your graph look like? How would you depict that? You can find a place anywhere on the whiteboard as well. I just want you to get some practice drawing these graphs if you can. It's just useful. Decrease and price would increase. Oh, very good. Okay, so let's look at what that looks like. Okay, demand would decrease and price would increase, says Keegan. Let's look at that. Okay, so here is our demand curve. Okay, and here is, of course, our supply graph. Okay, let's just label them appropriately. Supply and demand. I have to hand it to you guys. I marked on-campus papers and online papers this week, and you guys got these graphs very accurate. Okay, there were no swapping of supply and demand, so well done again. That just shows that you understand what you're doing. The graphs were impeccably well done. Okay, also, if you do struggle in, trying to create your graph in PowerPoint or Excel, drawing it is always a good alternative, but very few of you seem to struggle. Okay, so what Keegan is suggesting is that we will have a decrease in the demand for food, okay, which makes sense. Why? Petrol prices increased, transport costs are increasing, which means that we have increased food costs overall. Okay, so now if we have this decrease in demand, okay, what has happened? Now it's important to note that even though you draw the graph, and you guys did this very well, but just to point it out again, okay, when you are drawing your initial equilibrium, it's very important to sort of label them with those E's. Okay, so this would be QE, okay, and this would be PE, okay? That's just telling us that's our equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity, and this is our first equilibrium spot, okay? Then we said there would be a decrease in the food prices. Oh, sorry, in the demand for food. Now, if there is a decrease in the demand for food, I'm going to call this P1 so that we can see that there was a movement here. Okay, that would also result in a decrease in quantity demanded. What do you guys think? Likely to happen? If the price of food goes up, do we starve? Stop eating? Choose alternatives? What do we do? Also, what would companies do in this scenario? Okay, what happens to Tiger? Eat at your parents. Brilliant, Anna. Shop at competitors. Like how you guys are thinking. Choose alternatives. Good. Okay, so it's exactly what we would do. We would move our demand somewhere else. Okay, we would find an alternative. We'd probably also move down to like simpler foodstuffs. So, who would suffer the worst here? Do you think it would be a food company like Woolworths or a food company like ShopRite? Leslie, that was very astute. Yes, absolutely. Restaurants would be the first, Woolworths would be the next. Why? Because what we would end up doing is shifting our demand to an alternative, cheaper source of food. Okay, so the good stuff. Absolutely. Or, like Arno suggested, we would just go and eat at the parents', right? Why not? Okay, so as a result of that, okay, so this decrease in demand would then result in Woolworths and restaurants reacting to our decreased demand. Okay, so remember that when we were looking at this in chapter 4, this is as far as you need to go. So for your first assignment, this is where we would stop. You would say, okay, there is an increase in food prices overall. It's actually petrol prices. That's why we have a shift in the demand curve. So we demand alternatives to our expensive food groups. But now, because we are moving to demand and supply and action, we have to consider what Woolworths would do in response. They can't continue to supply at the same rate because if they do, their profits are being eaten into because their price is dropping. Exactly. So now either they continue to lower their prices to try and stir up demand, or they create their own shortage. They could come up with cheaper alternatives. It is likely, but remember, Keegan, what the reason that is always a difficult thing to do is because once you start dropping quality, it is very hard to get people to start seeing your brand the same way again. Okay, so think about if all the Apple phones went on a 50% discount um, without a time frame. Let's just say they were all 50% cheaper. What if the iPhone now became cheaper than your Huawei's? Okay. It would damage that premium brand, aspect of the business. So that's why Woolworths would have to respond, but they would be tactical about how they did it. Okay. Because what they're going to do is then they would start creating their own shortage. Because if they start restricting supply, they get to push the price right back to where it was. And we settle at a new equilibrium at the old price. Okay, so it's important to see that, remember when we discussed this, it was about magnitude of each move. Okay, so you can see that we can have a situation where, okay, the prices go up. We as consumers start restricting. We move away from Woolworths and we start shopping at ShopRite. Okay, we dedicate ourselves to our new consumer market. But in response to that, Woolworths will say, okay, no problem. We are now not going to have 50 different farmers supplying us with food or fresh food. We'll now restrict that down to 25. Okay, now at that smaller ratio, they will be supplying less into the market. What that does by restricting their own supply is that they force the quantity back down even further, as you can see here, but at a price point that still makes them a profit. Okay, so it's all about magnitude. And when you are considering these different scenarios that we pose to you, I want you to take it 2 steps ahead. Okay, so there's a few things that you need to consider. Okay, let's just make note of those. Okay, so first, what is happening? Okay, which product? Okay, now very often you will have, like you guys have seen where we did the petrol and petroleum jelly, they will give you more than one product and they will ask you to analyze the relationship between the two. Okay, so you have to understand from which perspective am I drawing these graphs? Am I looking at it from a petrol perspective or a Vaseline perspective? Okay, then you're going to say, okay, so what happens first? Okay, first action. Okay, is it demand or supply? Okay, what is moving? In whatever scenario they give you, you're going to give you um, something like the Strait of Hormuz. Then they're going to say, okay, specifically for the oil prices per barrel. Then they're going to say, because of this restriction, what is going to happen to your equilibrium price and quantity? So you have to analyze what is the first thing that is happening? What is being impacted? Is it demand or is it supply? Okay, the next thing you're going to figure out is it increasing or decreasing? Because that tells you how to shift your graph. Okay. After that, you do exactly the same thing, but you are looking at the response action. Okay, so if the demand or if the supply is restricted, what happens to the demand? And then you can be quite practical about it. If it is something that we can do without, you will find that there's a lot more sort of leeway. And we're going to be talking about that now because I'm going to start switching. Oh, goodness, I just wanted to put in bullet points. Okay, but so we're going to start looking now at the thing that impacts how these two graphs move. Okay, so we're going to start looking at elasticity. But you can be quite practical about how you apply these demand and supply models. Because if it is a product like Woolworths food, we would not, we would obviously just move into a cheaper food retailer until we can afford to go back to our preferred retailer. But if it's something like petrol, it is very unlikely that we will stop driving, in the long term, sell our cars because you're already quite invested. We may, in the short term, restrict our demand by using alternatives like Uber and trains and public transport, but in the long term, you are still very much invested in your car. So it becomes very difficult. Now, that's why we say that we have theory and we have the real world. And the lovely thing about this is that you are going to simplify the real world by applying this theory. Okay, so you can already predict how this is going to all pan out in the near future. Okay, so we have an idea that the price of food is probably going to start going up. So what you want to do now is buy non-perishables. Okay, start storing. Okay, so now we move on to our next. Do you guys have any questions here? Oh, and then of course the last thing.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's not really, I think, something that can be answered, but isn't there alternative routes for us to consume oil that will make us not suffer the shortages and increases?
That's actually a brilliant suggestion. So, what we currently have is a situation where the majority of our energy costs actually, we produce a lot of our own energy as well. We have natural gas deposits and we also have oil. We do import from the Middle East, but not as much. Yeah, look, they will impact us. We do import a lot of our oil from our neighboring African states like Nigeria, and even a little bit comes from Iran itself, but it's about, say, 15 to 30% of all of our oil. So we can compensate by, importing additional oil from Nigeria. Of course, that puts them in a situation where they can now dictate their price because our demand, so let's just look at this. Thank you, Arnaud. That is a brilliant observation. So now in Nigeria, they are sitting with a situation where they have a set supply and demand contract with South Africa. They have agreed to supply us with this quantity of oil at this specific price, okay, at equilibrium. But now, if we are in the situation where we have a restricted supply ourselves because 30% of our oil is not actually getting to us, our demand will move ahead of the supply restriction. So we will now start demanding from Nigeria this level of demand. Okay. Now they are unfortunately or fortunately under no obligation to increase their supply to us. We don't necessarily have a service level agreement with them to say, okay, we have the option to also claim an additional 20% of your oil production within your country. So what happens, despite the fact that we do have alternative sources, we still end up having to compensate for that. Say, let's assume it's 20%. That means that 20% is now going to be pulled from our neighboring country, but at a higher price. Now, that can be combated and eliminated if they are very kind to us and they say, you know what, don't worry about it. We will supply you with even more petrol or oil than we initially agreed upon. And that would be wonderful for us, although very unlikely to happen. Why? Because a company, a country, the suppliers make money when the price goes up. So if our demand leads ahead, we will end up in a situation where we do have this increased price, and we are demanding more supply from other providers. So obviously over time they will see that the increase in price is actually beneficial to them, and they'll start supplying additional oil into the market, because remember, it's very advantageous if overall the supply gets restricted. And so, for example, if you are Enron, which is the energy company in America, one of the oil companies in America, you are not being directly impacted by what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, because you don't supply oil to anybody on that side of the world. But the price per barrel is still going up. So even though you as a company are not experiencing this restriction, you are benefiting from the increase in price. So you as a supplier want to take advantage of this increase in price. How Okay, I'm going to go back to that. So you're taking advantage of the increase in price, and you would open the taps and try to supply more to take advantage of this increase and be able to earn more profits. Okay, let's go back to our food graph. Okay, Nandi, let's see here. How the supply graph increases. Okay, so in this scenario, we're suggesting that, okay, so let me be specific here. So this would be, let's be honest, this would be Woolworths food. Okay.
And
Okay,
ma'am, so wouldn't the supply graph shift downwards instead of up? I don't know, maybe I'm just confusing it.
no, you're absolutely, there is a scenario where that is exactly what happens. Let's look at that. Okay, so, oh, don't want to move that. Okay, so this is specifically for Woolworths food. Okay, so we were looking at our top end of our market, but let's look at something more reasonable. Okay, so back to food prices. Here we have our demand and supply very quickly. Okay. Okay, so the price has gone up. Our demand, let's say, so let's look at let's look at Checkers. Let's look at ShopRite. I think they are the ones that actually make a point of aiming for the budget customers. Okay, so here we have ShopRite. Now, what ShopRite would experience is an increase in their demand. Why? Because every other competitor just got more expensive. Okay, let's think about their competitors. You guys can, if you disagree, please let me know. But if you're looking at Spa, Checkers, what else do we have? Pick and Pay. Do we have any others that you guys can think of? Woolworths. I'm going to toss them back in here because they're always a great example of premium groceries. Anything else? Okay, so if we look at that, so now I know for a fact, okay, that ShopRite every year, they make Food Lovers is a great example as well. Okay, so Food Lovers, okay, they also make a very good point. In fact, they are in the similar category to ShopRite. Maybe slightly above, maybe more in the pick and pay section actually, but still quite close. But if you look at these competitors, Spa has quite a unique selling feature that they're like your spa grocers are the people that sort of take care of you, so they try to offer you more individualized customer experience. Woolworths is obviously offering you premium quality products. Checkers is offering you what is Checkers' angle? Maybe variety, also good quality. Pick and Pay seems to be more variety at a more reasonable price point, and probably Food Lovers is also fresh food, variety, um, but be willing to pay for sushi. Okay, so, okay, ShopRite is the company that makes a point of subsidizing the price of bread that they bake within their own within their own stores. Okay, so they have made it part of their brand to be servicing lower income households. So what they would experience is that all of these people who would move away from these more premium relative to ShopRite, these premium brands, ShopRite would experience an immediate and quick increase in their demand. Okay, so let's look at what is always most important. What is the impact on our equilibrium? Okay, so remember that if you are looking at investing, because this is microeconomics, it means that there are macroeconomic factors at play. So here we do have the Strait of Hormuz, okay, which half of us hadn't even heard of until it was closed. Okay, we're quite happy with all of these straits. Even the Suez Canal, didn't know it existed until they closed it down. And then I was like, what? Where did this random thing come from? Happens all the time. These are macroeconomic factors. They are geographical economic issues, but they have microeconomic impacts. But not everyone is impacted the same, even within an industry. Not all consumers are impacted the same. You guys, of course, know. And industries, specific businesses will actually benefit from certain macroeconomic events, even if their closest competitors don't. So, in this scenario where ShopRite is not adjusting their supply in the short term, they would experience a big influx of all of these consumers now moving into their stores. Why? Because we are quite happy to, you know, go into ShopRite and take advantage of the discount prices. Now, because poor ShopRite, they have a phenomenal logistics system, but they can't react overnight all the time, okay? It takes time to move products across the country. They would eventually do so. Okay, but in the short term, what we as consumers will experience is that everybody now moves into ShopRite. There's an increase in the quantity that is demanded, but because we've increased our demand so quickly, they would experience an increase in price. Now, in order to maintain ShopRite's advantage in the market, they have to maintain their prices. So they would be making very quick calls to all of their suppliers to say, send me whatever you have as quickly as possible, so that they can meet the new quantity that is being demanded from them. Okay, obviously, because price is very important as well, if they don't adjust their supply fast enough, they will lose their competitive advantage based on price. So, an ideal scenario for ShopRite at this stage would be to take advantage of this short-term price increase, but to use it to expand their supply network. Okay, so again, magnitude becomes quite important here. We could increase our demand this much. Supply could increase slightly less than our demand, in which case our price would still go up, but we would receive a much greater quantity at a slight price premium at an already budget store. Alternatively, their supply could increase even further. They could massively expand into this advantage. Let's say they have the unique scenario that they have their own oil reserves, so their transport costs are not going up the way their competitors are, in which case they would be able to supply a massive amount to the market, even more than is even currently being demanded, perhaps. Okay. This could be very advantageous to the company. Why? Because there are certain companies that, and we will get there later in the module, that have a massive advantage in something called economies of scale. So the more you produce, the better your costs become. So the lower your costs become per product, and your profitability increases. Now remember, this has happened many times, and this scenario has made ShopRite who they are today. Because they could always source more quickly, faster than their competitors, they were able to drop their price points. Now remember, it doesn't have to be a massive difference between these prices. It could be the difference between paying, 18 Rand for a loaf of bread to paying just 13 Rand at ShopRite. Okay. And they do that because they subsidize. So they supply more to the market to keep their low price point. And that's what makes them untouchable. This creates a very difficult scenario when you are looking at how sensitive people from Woolworths could be to a change in price. Okay, so we're going to be looking at that in great detail now going forward. But you can see the market is dictated very much by what we almost have hindsight, because first you'll have an increase in demand because people will have a knee-jerk reaction. But then the supplier has to start, creating things. But we have to be mindful that these things take time. That's why you have to separate out chapter 4 and chapter 5. Because let's be reasonable. If you are ShopRite and you've already expanded to increase your orders by 20%, it's not always easy to increase to 50%. It takes time. You have to find people who are going to be a reliable source. You've got to create the contracts. All of that means that you can go from a scenario where only one element is moving, so you have just your demand increasing and your supply not being impacted, but your price going up as a result. Or you can have a scenario where, the increase in price of petrol massively impacts the demand for Woolworths food. And then in the same industry, you can have ShopRite having the best year of their lives because, or in the, expanse of this corporation's existence, because they can scale, and they can scale faster. Now, South African companies are particularly good at logistics because we do a lot of road works, a lot of road transportation. So essentially what you're looking at is what sort of magnitude. So in this scenario, we had ShopRite being very scalable. So we had a relatively small increase in demand, but we could see a massive increase in supply, which actually, because if supply increases more than your demand, you will have a drop in price and an increase in quantity. If you have more of a 1-to-1 ratio, an increase in demand or a decrease in demand could be met with a proportional decrease in supply as the company adjusts to our new demand profile. We could also see here, like in the scenario of petrol, we in the short term would see a decrease in our demand. Why? Because we would look at alternatives. So our short-term graph would just be a decrease from D to D1, but our supply remaining constant. But over time, especially with regards to OPEC and oil per barrel, they have the option to close or open their taps. So we could also see that there's an increase in our imports from Nigeria. Okay, so, or the Middle East, as they are now, could further restrict the supply in the future. If this continues and they continue to decrease or restrict the supply through the Strait of Hormuz, we could see massive petrol and oil spikes in the near future that no one is really anticipating. We also do know that eventually demand will restabilize because Uber is an alternative, but eventually what will happen? Even Uber will adjust. Okay. So they will start saying, you know, at our current prices, we're not making the profit that we expected because Uber is a private company as well, who still has to answer to shareholders. So, what will their response be to this massive increase in demand? So, they're very happy to get new customers because they too benefit from scale. If there is increased demand, like in just looking at a typical weekday, versus if you're looking at PE, where we have fewer people, not a lot of people who are willing to pay for an Uber or wait for an Uber. So we have quite a restricted supply of drivers in PE. But in Cape Town, there are ample numbers of drivers because there are so much more demand available there. So even in this scenario, we're looking at Uber. So in the short term, what they're experiencing is, oh, wow, look at this. An increase in demand because people are now choosing not to drive their cars, but instead to take an Uber because it's cheaper. Okay, of course, Uber loves this scenario in the short term, but you cannot have this, over an extended period of time. Otherwise, what you will have is more and more people start to become Uber drivers because as it becomes more profitable, if this is, let's say, petrol price has gone up by 20%, but as a result, in this quick shift in the demand for Uber, no one really notices the 25% increase in their prices simply based on this additional demand. Now, because it's now 25% better rates for driving, you could see an influx of new drivers. Now, it can be any measure of response. It can be a small response. So only a few people think at 25%, only a few extra drivers jump into the market. In which case, Uber still has the advantage of charging a premium and having more customers being serviced, or they can have a massive uptake in drivers, in which case the price comes back down to nearly where it was at the original equilibrium, and they have a much larger customer base. Okay. So it is always very important to, once again, we're just going to look at the things that you have to look at. So you want to ask yourself, what is happening? Are we experiencing some sort of crisis in the world? Which product am I specifically dealing with? is the product being impacted on the demand or the supply side? Is it increasing or is it decreasing? And I have forgotten something here. Is it increasing or is it decreasing? And then what is the magnitude of the move? Okay. Is it big or a small shift? Okay. And then you're going to put yourself through the exact same analytical process on the other side. Okay. So after this, in the short term, what happened to the demand or supply? Was it a big or small shift? Did it increase or decrease? In other words, did I shift my curve left or right? And by how much? Then how would the other side respond? Okay, if there is a restriction in supply, typically you'd expect your demand to respond in kind. But for how long? That would depend on the product itself. Okay, I don't know. I hope that Nandi, okay, just going back quickly. Does this answer your food graph? It is very much because we're looking at microeconomics. It'll come down to the company you're looking at, the product, or the industry. Okay. Um, and then you just look at these analytical points. Make little notes for yourself. And then after you draw your graph, this is exactly how you're going to describe it. The only difference is in your description, you're going to include what happens to price and quantity. So at each stage, what happens to price and quantity? Okay, so, oh, this is actually come after this. Here, okay. And then you're going to repeat on the other side. It is sometimes possible that you will have like this in the case of ShopRite, a double movement in supply. So for example, let's look at for ShopRite, they see that there's an increase in demand. They immediately contact their suppliers and say, send me an increase of 20% across the board. That alleviates some price pressure and allows them to not have empty shelves. But because all of the people from Woolworths were the first to move, then it will be the people from Spar and Checkers. Then they come across to ShopRite. And by that stage, ShopRite might again have to call their suppliers and say, well, send me whatever you can. I need to keep my prices low. If that scenario does happen, the consumer can massively benefit. And this often happens when a company decides to expand or go cross-national, where they are looking for additional supply. Okay, so typically speaking, any increase in supply will have a decreasing impact on your price and an increasing impact on your quantity. Any increase in demand will push up your price, and it's uncertain what it will do to your quantity, possibly increase it if their supply is there. Okay. If there is a decrease in your demand, you will see that the price will be the first thing to drop, and then, of course, quantity will follow it. A company like Woolworths would respond by then decreasing the amount available. Okay, so this happens with the petrol price as well. If there is a restriction in economic activity globally, you'll see that the demand will drop from every country in the world. But the OPEC companies cannot allow the price of oil to drop below $50 a barrel, because if it does, they're not making a profit on the barrels they sell. So what they do is they restrict the supply by turning the taps off. So they supply less oil to the market to force the price back up. Okay, so just follow these simple analytical steps, and if you get stuck, just let me know. But always just give yourself little notes and then draw the graph. It does look a bit complicated by the time you've drawn in all of your lines, but just remember to mark each stage and you should be fine. Okay, then I'm going to move into elasticity on time then. So I thought we could move a little bit ahead, but we are actually scheduled to look at elasticity next week. And elasticity is essentially just how your quantity reacts to changes in price. So it speaks directly into this module, and into this chapter. It's just an expansion to understanding what are the factors that actually influence that magnitude of, shift in demand and supply. Guys, I don't know if you have any questions. I've gone over time again. Please forgive me. Thank you for staying with me for